Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Just a couple minutes, and then we will get our meeting going today. But hope you're having a great start, and we'll take us into the weekend with this lecture. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get it started. It is now 9 a.m., so welcome back, and hi there, Eva, everybody else watching and tuning in. Thanks, guys, for being here. It's always great to see you guys. So let's continue. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm going to try and finish off a couple of leftover comments on the Descartes essay that we were breaking down the last couple of lectures, and then we're going to transition into the next author on this topic, which is Daniel Stoljar, who just defends and discusses physicalism. So we've got two positions that are being debated here, dualism versus physicalist monism. And these are just two different viewpoints about how many substances make up the universe. And of course, this is connected to our topic of the mind, since the mind is one of the things in the universe, and the nature of its origin or basis is what we're questioning. So in dualism, there's two types of substances that make everything. There's physical matter, stuff that's extended in space, basically atoms if you boil it down to the least bit. And then there's also mind, according to dualism, which is not made out of anything physical. It doesn't have any extension in space, but it's just pure consciousness. So Descartes gave the argument for dualism, or at least one very powerful classical argument for dualism. And that's what we spent a lot of time talking about last lecture. So just a quick recap. There are many steps to his argument, and so I'm giving you a very, quick summary here. But basically, the argument for dualism that he gives starts off by just pointing out that in the method of doubt, there's so much that we're able to doubt. We're able to doubt everything that we perceive with our five senses, even math and logic. But one thing that can't be doubted is that you exist as a thinking mind just because you're thinking. So that's something that is safe and secure and that can't be doubted, that you exist. So from there he says, okay, well, knowing that you exist, you know you have ideas. And in your mind, these ideas, there are many of them, but one of them is the idea of God. And as he points out, the idea of God is different from other ideas because it's the idea of something that is infinite. It's the idea of an infinite being. So what he argues is that this idea that you have of God has to come from something, and whatever it comes from has to be at least as great as the idea is. So if you have an idea of an infinite being, the cause of the idea must also be infinite. Therefore, there is an infinite being, and that's God. So this is his proof of God's existence. It's derived from the fact that you have an idea of him in your mind, and that idea is infinite, and that the cause of the idea must be also, therefore, at least infinite. So there's an infinite being, there's God. From this, he infers that since God is known to be infinitely good, since he's known to be all good, he is not a deceiver. And he takes that to imply that if he's not a deceiver, then when you have clear and distinct perceptions, those have to be true, because otherwise you'd be manipulated or tricked. So clear and distinct perceptions must be true. one of the clear and distinct perceptions that he singles out for mention is that if there are two things that can be clearly conceived of as existing separately, even just in your mind, then those two things are actually really separate things in reality. Like in the one example I mentioned, me and a watch, I'm wearing a watch, but it's easy enough to imagine me and the watch being separated. And since that's clearly conceivable, it's something that really could happen, and in the end, we're not the same object. Me and this watch are two different things, because it's clearly conceivable that we could exist separately. So, he says, it is also clearly conceivable that the mind and the body could exist separately. If for no other reason than the fact that in the method of doubt, it is something that can be doubted whether the body even exists, but the mind's existence is known for sure. So one can conceive of their mind and body existing separately. If that's clearly conceivable, then they actually are two separate things, and that's his conclusion, that the mind and the body are two separate things. Now, I just wanted to go back into his essay for one last moment to discuss what are some other things that he believes are also clear and distinct perceptions. Okay, because what Descartes said, if you follow the argument, is that when you have a clear and distinct perception of something, it must be true. And why? Because God backs the clear and distinct perceptions with a guarantee of truth, because he's too good to allow those things to be illusory or false. So clear and distinct perceptions have to be true. That's a principle that is argued for in his big argument. But there are other clear and distinct perceptions that he also wants us to understand we can trust in now that we have, according to him, proven that God exists. So what are some of these other clear and distinct perceptions? Okay, so he mentions that the external world exists. It's not a dream. So that's another clear and distinct perception that I'm putting here on this board, that the external reality that you think you're, in is real. It actually is real. It's not something false or fake or a dream. That is something that is real. But why is that clear and distinct? He gives a couple of reasons why this seems to us to be so clear and distinct. Okay, so this is clear because, number one, I cannot perceive only that which is favorable. So one thing that he thinks indicates that the real external world is real, it's not just a big dream, is that if the world around you was a dream, so imagine that, okay? Suppose that right now you're dreaming, and the concept of you being a student at Chapman or a student in a philosophy class, I mean, it just appears to be, but really in the reality, you're dreaming the whole thing, and all these other people and all these other objects all around you, they're all just figments of your mind. Okay, well, if that was the case, and the world was your dream, then you'd think you would have some ability to control the content of the dream. And so that would imply that pretty much, since it would be in your interest for everything to work out good, that nothing negative would ever happen and only positive things would happen. So you would imagine that if this world was a big dream, then you would never lose anything, you would always be successful, because you could simply will those things into reality. But of course, as we know, unfortunately, the real world isn't exactly like that. We do suffer setbacks, obstacles, difficulties, things that we don't want to happen, injuries, sicknesses, all kinds of things that we'd prefer not to happen. So if the world was a dream, you'd think it would be a little bit more conducive to your interests, because you'd be the author in a way of the dream, editing it according to your preferences. But that's certainly not what happens, and that gives us a sense that the world out there is itself real. Another thing is this: I also cannot control what I perceive. So, I mean, if I ask you right now, I want you to see a platypus right here on this table, or not even on this table, but like in your own space that you're in right now. Just look to your right on the ground, and I want you to actually like see a platypus, not think of one, not just imagine one, but like see one as though it's right there in the room. That's something that you can't do. No matter how creative you are, you can't just cause things to be available to perceive by just wishing that they were. So that shows, again, he thinks that the real external reality does exist, because if it was just creations of the mind, imaginary things, then you think you could cause things to pop up or pop out of existence just by thought. But that's not how it is, and that gives us a sense further that the external objects have their own independent existence. They can neither be willed into existence if they're not there, nor can they be willed out of existence if they are there. So you can't make your computer just disappear right now by thinking it doesn't exist. And so once again, it seems like your mind does not have control over what's really out there objectively. And then another thing is this. So you can't perceive only that which is favorable. You can't control what you perceive. Another point is that, and this is a little subtle, it takes a moment to explain, but the third factor is memories are less vivid than the original perceptions were. Okay. Okay, sorry if it's a little bit small, but what it says there is that memories are less vivid than original perception. So, okay, I want you to compare how clear and sharp two different things are. This experience that you're now having, watching this lecture in the present moment, right now, versus, I don't know, think back to your memory of our first meeting, way back towards the beginning of the semester, talking about the ontological argument, okay? So one of those two things is live, and it's happening now. The other one is in the past, and it's back there with your memories. So which one is clearer? Like, which of the two things is more vivid and sharp? The present experience or the memorial recalling, the recollection of a previous experience? It's this lecture, okay? And I mean, we can even think about this lecture as it will appear to you later. So right now, this is happening live, so it couldn't get sharper and clearer than this. But if you want to, let's say, go back in your mind, think about this lecture later today. Suppose it's like 5 p.m. later, and you're like, you know, that was an interesting lecture. Let me remember it and like, go back in my mind. When you're thinking back to this lecture later, it's not going to be quite as sharp and clear as this moment is. And that's how memories work. They're kind of like less sharp, a little bit faded, dulled out copies of the original experiences that you have. Now, why is this evidence that the external world exists? Well, what the author Descartes says is that if the whole world was just a dream, right, then there wouldn't be any difference. There would be no drop-off between having the original experience and remembering it later, because both would just be experiences that you're having in your mind. The only thing that can explain that the present experience is more clear than the past memories are is that when you're having the present experience, you are surrounded by the objects that you are immediately perceiving. So you're right now looking at the computer that's providing this content to you in the lecture. When you're not with the computer and you're simply in the mind's eye trying to recall the sequence of events, that's not as clear because you're no longer in the presence of the actual external object in your environment that generates the perception. So if the world was a dream, there shouldn't be a difference between the two, the character of quality of the both. Because when you have the original experience, there's no objects around you and you're just thinking thoughts. And then when you have the memory later, it would have to be the same, you know, because in both cases, you're not actually with any objects because you're just simply a dreamer. But of course, being that you are not a dreamer and that you're actually in the external real world, present experiences in the live moment are more distinct than the memories would be, because in the moment, you're with the objects, and later on with the memories, you're no longer with them. Okay, so that's another thing that makes this seem clear and distinct. And then there's just one more on the same point, and that is that he thinks you can tell that you're not dreaming because in dreams, the dreams don't all hang together into one coherent narrative. They're episodic. So like you have one dream tonight where you're getting like an ice cream cone and it spills, and then tomorrow you get a dream where you're hiking in the Himalayas, and then you have another dream the next day and you're, I don't know, surfing at the beach. But these dreams don't all stick together into one long timeline or storyline, but your waking experiences do. So like right now you're watching this lecture, but it's not just a random thing. You also remember you were in the same kind of lecture on Wednesday and on Monday, and you can go back in your memory and connect this experience with all the other things that have led up to it, like when you applied to go to Chapman and when you were graduating from high school and thinking about your options for college. So waking experiences all are connected. There's a continuity to them. But dreams are just sort of sporadic, random, and they don't hold together into one big story. And therefore, he says that's another reason to believe that when you're awake like you are now, that you're actually not dreaming. Okay, so the fourth thing would just be that dreams don't, cohere into one narrative like your actual waking experiences do. And so that's the one more reason then to have some good confidence that you are awake. So it's basically Descartes saying, never mind what I was telling you earlier about how maybe everything's a dream. Now that he believes he has proven that God exists and that God is so good that he's not a deceiver, now if there's something clear and distinct, he's prepared to tell you that it's actually fair enough to trust in it. And one thing that is clear and distinct, according to his discussion here, is just this idea that the external world is real and it's not just a big dream. I'll say this from his writing, kind of on point number 4, just to give you some text from there. He says, I know that there is a vast difference between being asleep and being awake now. I now notice this, in that dreams are never linked by memory with all the other actions of life, as waking experiences are. If while I am awake, anyone were suddenly to appear to me and then disappear immediately, as happens in sleep, so that I could not see where he had come from or where he had gone, it would not be unreasonable for me to judge that he was a ghost or a vision created in my brain rather than a real person. But when I distinctly see where things come from and where and when they come to me, and when I can connect my perceptions of them with the whole of the rest of my life, then I am quite certain that when I encounter these things, I am not asleep but awake. And I ought not to have even the slightest doubt of their reality, if after calling upon all the senses as well as my memory and my intellect in order to check them, I receive no conflicting reports from any of these sources. Okay, so one clear and distinct perception that we've now added to Descartes' discussion, and this shows you that at the end of his Meditations book, he's coming back to the everyday picture of the world, that we're not dreaming, that the external reality is actually real, and that's something that we can know for sure. Another clear and distinct perception that he mentions is this one, that I have a body. I have a body, and it's my body. And why is this clear and distinct? Well, he says this is clear and distinct for a couple reasons. Because if you remember, that was also subject to doubt. At the beginning of the method of doubt, he said, do I have a body? Maybe, I don't know. It could be that I'm just dreaming the thought that I have this body, and in fact, I've got no such thing. So, why is that clear and distinct? Now he's prepared to say. Well, one of the reasons is this, that I experience, and same as for you, the first person that you are, you experience sensations when a stimuli is given to your body, but not to others. And that gives you a clear sense that that's yours, because you feel things that happen to it, but not other bodies in space. Peachy. Let me move you, girl. Okay, yeah, so. Okay, so I know you never probably have ever thought once in your life, what's the proof or evidence that this is my body? I mean, it's clear enough. But if you were forced to defend the proposition, you would think of things like this. For example, when some stimuli is placed on your body, whether it's heat, cold, tickle, pain, pleasure, whatever, you are the one who experiences the sensation. So I'm like giving myself a small pinch on the hand right now. And oops, that kind of hurt a little. But you don't feel the pain because the pinch is not being applied to your body. I am, because it's being applied to my body. So that makes it seem clear enough that only this one is mine. because it's the only one where I experience something when something happens to it. If I was like a captain on a ship and a cannonball hit the ship, the captain doesn't say ouch, because the ship is not his body. Okay, but when something strikes your actual body and you feel either a sensation of pleasure, pain, or anything else, it's not like the case of the ship. You're intimately integrated with that body and you experience a sensation when anything happens physically to it. So it seems pretty clear that it's yours. Another reason that that's clear and distinct is this. I can control the actions of this body with my mind, but not others. Okay, so another good reason that it's clear enough that that's your body sitting in your chair then, is that you're the only one who has the ability to control it just by thought, right? So if I say I'm going to snap my 2 fingers, I do it, and I can command myself to do it just by the thought. Let's do this, and then it happens. But I can't do that for anyone else. I can't look over at someone and be like, the stuff that my body does, whether it's walking, running, snapping my fingers, even just talking right now. But I don't have the ability to control the behavior of any other body. So that seems like it's not any other body, but just this one that is mine. And then also the third point here is that I cannot be removed from this body, or at least not while I'm still alive. Of course, Descartes says that when you die, the soul and the body are separated, but during one's life, you can't get any distance away from this body, but you can any other. So I can't separate myself from this body. And that's unlike all the others. Everybody else and every other object, I can go away from it. If I don't want to be close to it, I can just move in a different direction. But with concern to this body, it's mine. I can't go anywhere. I can't take a break and just leave it behind and go somewhere else. So here are some good solid reasons to know or understand that you do have a body. So now it seems as if we've taken a big long loop back to common sense. It's not the case that there's no external reality. It's not the case that you don't have a body. You do have a body. It's this one. It's the one that you think you have. And everything that you perceive in the external reality, when you see it in a clear and distinct way, those things are actually true too. So he was only kind of teasing us, or I don't want to say teasing because it's not so trivial as that, but he was only going through an intellectual exercise earlier in the book when he was stimulating all these doubts about how do you really know that the reality is real, or how do you really know that you even have a body? Now, as he's taken us through this kind of detailed argument that includes the existence of God, he believes that's enough to start giving us trust and confidence in things that the method of doubt initially caused us to question. And so at the end of his book, very last paragraph actually, he says this, from the fact that God is not a deceiver, it follows that in cases like these I am completely free from error. But since the pressure of things to be done does not always allow us to stop and make such a meticulous check, it must be admitted that in this human life we are often liable to make mistakes about particular things, and we must acknowledge the weakness of our nature. So God's not a deceiver, and when you have clear and distinct perceptions, those are definitely true. But he mentions that we can still make mistakes. If you have a judgment about something that's not clear and distinct, then God doesn't necessarily protect you against making a mistake on that. So like when you make a math problem error or something, it's not like that means God is not all good, because that's a case where you are the one who's making a hasty judgment before the matter has become clear and distinct to you. But if you wait for clear and distinct judgments and perceptions, they are going to be true for sure. And these are some that he includes in that set. All right, well, the only other thing I can mention about Descartes, and I guess I do want to talk about it because he has a lot of comments in this sixth meditation, and without a little bit of help from the professor to bring them all together, it can seem a little bit scattered. So I just want to make one last point. Descartes also in his sixth chapter of Meditations talks about two different abilities or capacities of the mind. Okay, Okay, and what he means, or what he refers to here is imagination and understanding. Okay, so first off, imagination is his word to refer to when you just form images in your mind of things that you have perceived with your senses in the past. Okay, so to represent in the mind images of things that were originally perceived by the senses. Okay, and he says this is related to our bodily aspect, to our physical nature. Because again, Descartes says that dualism is true, so that there's both physical matter and the mind. And we're most essentially the mind, because our body can be destroyed and the mind can endure. That's what he believes. But to him, the imagination is the part of the functioning of our mind that is a little more rooted in our bodily physical nature, because it is enabled by perception of things that we have had in the past. And perception requires the sense organs. Like you can't see without physically the eyes. You can't smell without the body part, the nose. You can't hear without the ears, or taste without the tongue. So the five senses provide us with the material, the content, that we can then use our imagination to represent. That's why the imagination has a connection to our bodily nature. Okay, so he says this is related to our bodily aspect. A little more room here. Now, on the other hand, understanding is a little different. It's much different, actually, than that. Understanding is just pure, pure mental contemplation of ideas, unaided by imagery. Okay, so without mental imagery or representation. And this, he says, is more related to our mental aspect, to our non-physical mind aspect. So okay, so to give an example that shows the difference between the two abilities of the mind, he talks briefly about geometric figures. Okay, so hold that thought for a minute. I want to make sure that you understand imagination in all good detail. Okay, so if I'm asking you to imagine something, I'm just asking you to think of something that maybe isn't present before you. Like I don't have to say imagine an eraser if I'm actually giving you the ability to see one with your sight. Imagining something means think of something that's not actually there right now. So if I tell you to imagine a cow, and you're not just looking at a picture or video of one, then I think in your mind right now the image will pop up of that familiar animal that you've seen in the past. Now, how is it that you're able to conceive of the idea of the cow without the cow being there? Well, it's because although there's no cow in your immediate presence, at some point in your life, you've seen either pictures, video, or you've actually dealt with, in reality, in space, an actual cow. So you've seen such a thing before, and now you can draw on your memories of those previous perceptions to conjure up in the mind the image of such a thing. Now let me give you another example. If I tell you, imagine a purple cow standing on the moon, the surface of the moon. Now I know that's not something that you've ever perceived, because that has never happened, right? But what have you perceived? in order to make this imagination possible? Let me know from the chat if you can gain a sense of what I'm asking here. For you to imagine a purple cow on the moon, you certainly can't go into a memory of having seen the exact thing before, but you have seen such things as what? In the past. The color purple, good. You've seen that shade, you've seen that type of animal, you've seen the moon, and so you can kind of creatively recombine the elements of your previous perceptions into a new setting, a new scene, and imagine something kind of weird and different like that. So imagination works in that way. You cull perceptions from reality by experiencing things, and then at will, you can simply contemplate, reflect on those things, and give yourself a new imaginary picture in the mind. So that's how imagination works, and he does think it's more related to our physical nature because it passes through perception. Understanding, though, is just pure abstract thought without any mental imagery or previous perceptions involved. He gives the case of a triangle, okay? So take a triangle. If I ask you to imagine a triangle right now, you'll be thinking in your mind of that shape, the three-sided polygon figure of a triangle. But it takes more than just imagining it to understand it. To understand a triangle, you have to take like a class in geometry or even trig, and then you learn things about how, you know, the internal angles of the triangle all sum to 180 degrees. You learn, you know, Pythagoras' theorem and how to calculate various geometric properties of the triangle. So knowing about the triangle, understanding the triangle, takes an effort of a mind that's different from imagination. Same with a circle. If I tell you imagine a circle, you'll just see one in the mind's eye. But if you understand the circle, then you have to know things about like pi, and you have to know about how each point along the perimeter is equally distant from the radius. And those are things that are not necessarily understood just by thinking in terms of images. It's understood by having an abstract comprehension of the concept itself. And one more example. There's a polygon which is called a chiliagon. It's sort of spelled like it looks like the word chili, C-H-I-L-I-A-G-O-N, chiliagon. Now, a chiliagon is a 1,000-sided polygon. If I ask you to imagine a chiliagon, I don't think you're going to have much in the mind that you can actually see very clearly, because there's so many sides that in the mind's eye, it starts to appear almost as though ambiguously sided or too many-sided for you to actually distinguish each one. So you don't have a clear imagination of that, but you could deduce geometric properties of the chiliagon just from the ability to think about it mentally. So this, he believes, is further evidence that we are divided into two sorts of substance: the physical substance that makes up the body, and then the pure mental concept of the mind that thinks. Being that there are these two different faculties of the mind, and that one is more consistent with our physical nature and one is more consistent with our mental nature, he believes that just gives further credence to his overall analysis, that there's both mind and body. So let me read you about the chiliagon thing one time, and then we'll just be done with Descartes. He says, on page 554, to make this clear, I will first examine the difference between imagination and pure understanding. When I imagine a triangle, for example, I do not merely understand that it is a figure bounded by three lines, but at the same time I also see the three lines with my mind's eye as if they were present before me, and this is what I call imagining. But if I want to think of a chiliagon, although I understand that it is a figure consisting of 1,000 sides, just as well as I understand the triangle to have 3 sides, I do not in the same way imagine the 1,000 sides or see them as if they were present before me. It is true that since I am in the habit of imagining something, whenever I think of an object, I may construct in my mind a confused representation of some figure, but it is clear that this is not a chiliagon because it differs in no way from a myriagon, like a 500-sided object, or any figure with very many sides. Moreover, such a representation is useless for recognizing the properties which distinguish a chiliagon from other polygons. But suppose I am dealing with a pentagon. I can, of course, understand the figure of a pentagon just as I can the figure of a chiliagon without the help of the imagination. But I can also imagine it by applying my mind's eye to its 5 sides and the area contained within them. So, as human beings, we are more than just bodies. We also are minds occupying the bodies, and the mind itself is shown to be distinct from the physical aspect because of the presence of understanding. I think Descartes would say something like, even a dog or a cat can imagine or perceive a triangle. Like, you place one in its environment and it could look at it and it could see it, but it wouldn't understand anything about the underlying geometric nature of the shape. So with us as humans, we've got these minds, and it's a little bit more over and beyond just having the ability to perceive things and then imagine them later. Okay, so much for Descartes. We've heard about dualism from him, but there's a whole other side to this argument that now have to start developing, and that's the physicalist side of the debate. What can be said then in favor of the other idea, that there are not two substances, there's only one, and it's just matter, and everything's made out of matter, even me and you and our consciousness. So that's the next argument to try and get clear about. So, that takes us now into the writing of Daniel Stoljar. Okay, Daniel Stoljar is an Australian philosopher, current day, modern, still living philosopher. And so let me see this page here. Yeah, so this is from a paper that he wrote in 2005. And it's really got a simple title. It's just called Physicalism. Okay, so Physicalism by Daniel Stoljar. And his argument, well, he wants to defend physicalism. He wants to try and convince us that it is true and that it's better than dualism. But before he tries to show that it's true, he first of all wants to just even explain what it is. So to open the discussion, he gives a definition of physicalism. And it's a pretty simple definition. He just says that it is the concept that everything is physical. That's physicalism. It says that everything is physical. Okay, so it's a thesis about what everything in the universe is made out of. It says that everything in this whole universe is made out of physical matter, including me and you and just everything from the top to bottom. It's a physical world. The actual world is a physical place. That's what the argument is saying. According to physicalism, and he points this out, although there are other subjects that people study academically, scientifically, at the end of the day, if physicalism is true, all of these different subjects are ultimately branches of physics, indirectly. So you study history and you think this has nothing to do with physics. But according to physicalism, any episode or event that has ever played out in history is just the workings of matter in the void of space operating according to natural physical laws. So, the French Revolution or World War II or anything else is just a bunch of biological life forms on the surface of a planet Earth, acting according to their biological imperatives and doing whatever the matter that forms their bodies and existences dictates. So everything's physical. A person that's studying English literature or poetry may think that has nothing to do with physics, but a person, even a solitary poet writing the poem, is merely a physical object, eliciting certain behaviors based on the conditions that are then present. And so even if it takes a little longer to understand how the thing connects to physics, everything is about physics. Everything that exists is a physical object just operating according to physical natural laws. So that's one point that he mentions at the beginning. If physicalism is true, everything's physical, and every other science and every other academic subject is really indirectly just a part of physics. So to even now take us a bit farther in the discussion, he introduces two big questions about physicalism. Physicalism is one kind of monism, as I've said to you guys before, and monism overall says that there's only one kind of substance that makes everything up in the universe. To be honest, if you go way back in history, thousands of years back, there were other versions of monism that used to exist, way before people had more, I guess, modern understanding of how the world works and how it's formed. So in ancient pre-Socratic Greece, talking about even before Socrates, there were some people that thought everything in the whole universe is made out of water. The man's name of that case was Thales. Thales believed that everything is just water, 100%. So that's a weird view, and of course we know that's not true anymore. But back then the thought was, well, there's so much water in the ocean, and if you kind of like breathe on your hand, you see the water condenses, so maybe everything is just more or less a state of water. There were other people who thought, no, everything's made out of fire. Some people who thought everything was made out of earth. Well, anyway, it's 2020 now, and we don't hold the fire, water, or earth version of monism, but we do have physicalism, which says that everything's made out of matter, and essentially the matter, if you boil it down, are these little particles, atoms. Okay, so to understand physicalism better, he says, let's try to deal with two big questions. So 2 questions about physicalism are coming next in his discussion. Okay, so one of these he calls the interpretation question. Okay. The other he calls the truth question. Okay, so the interpretation question asks, what does it mean to say that everything is physical? What does that mean? The truth question asks a slightly different question. It asks, well, is it true that everything is physical? Is that even true? Okay, so Daniel Stoljar's saying that we have to deal with these 2 questions in order to be fully informed about physicalism and to understand it in good detail. Now, these are 2 different questions, but they're both related. And he also says that in order for you to answer one of them, you kind of have to deal with the other one first. So what do you think about that, just using your judgment? Which of these 2 questions would you have to basically tackle first before you can move on to the other one? What do you think about that? Which one has first priority, at least logically? Because you can't answer the second one really until you have answered this one. Which one do you think is first in this ordering of explanation? Megan, you're saying number 2 is first? No, because number 2 says, is it true? But you can't understand whether something is true if you don't even know what it means, right? So like, what if I tell you, watch out because it's Friday the 13th and I've heard that there's quibbles everywhere. Well, actually I shouldn't use the word quibble because it's an actual word. I gotta make up a word. Watch out on Friday the 13th because there's bargles all over the place. Now, is that true what I just said? You don't know because you don't even know what it means. So you have to understand how to interpret a statement before you can check to see whether it's true. If you don't know what it means, then you don't even know what you would be looking for to verify it or not to verify it. Okay, so we have to deal with the first question first, the interpretation question. We have to come up with some way of understanding, well, what does it even mean to say that everything is physical? After that, we can go on, now knowing what it means, and interrogate whether it's actually a true claim or not. Okay, so the interpretation question comes first. To answer this question, the author says that the most typical method of doing that is to look to the notion of what is called supervenience. Okay, so supervenience is like a major concept to explain physicalism that now Daniel Stoljar launches into. So let's talk about that. So again, what we're doing now is we're answering this interpretation question, and we're doing that by means of the concept of supervenience. Okay, now this is like a fancy looking philosophy word that you just don't see anywhere else. Supervenience. So the idea of supervenience requires some analysis, and the best example to give to think about how to understand it is the example of what is called a dot matrix picture. And this is mentioned in the text as well. So probably a lot of us don't think much about dot matrix images anymore because it's somewhat a relic of the era of printing. Printed materials to this day rely on a dot matrix, but a lot of times nowadays we're looking at digitized images on screens instead of actual printed paper. But anyway, let's see if you can comprehend this. So take a newspaper, which has to stamp out an exact copy of the same cover photo for every new copy of the same day's paper. Well, how does that work? You might not know, but if you look at a photo that's shown in a magazine or comic book or newspaper, and you look at it under close magnification, what you see when you zoom in is actually that the picture is made out of a bunch of little ink dots that are arranged in a given pattern. Okay? When you back out, all you see is the full image. When you zoom in, it takes a bit of magnification, but you'll see little dots, 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 dots of different color. And the arrangement and the ordering and the pattern of those dots assembled in that way is what constitutes the big picture. So in art, some people have heard about the concept of a mosaic, right? Like a mosaic is a similar idea. You've got little tiles of various colors, and by assembling them, you can create a larger image out of the tiles. Sometimes I've seen these weird photos. Have you ever seen those where it's like a picture of some person's face or whatever, but if you look closely, every single pixel of the photo is itself a different photograph with that kind of tone or color behind it so that it acts to form a big picture out of a bunch of little pictures? Okay, so like, I just need you to think of any example like that. A big picture, but it's made out of a bunch of little dots placed in a certain order. Okay, so printing press does work like that. You basically have a grid, and this grid can have dots mapped onto it at each coordinate position on the grid. Once you have assigned positions and colors of dots, in one case where we reproduce a digital photo into the dot matrix, you can then simply stamp the same exact replica on each new sheet of paper, and we repeat the photograph that way. Okay, so a dot matrix is a reliable way of reproducing images by assembling them out of tiny little dots arranged in a given pattern. Okay, now, suppose that this is a dot matrix picture. It's not going to be the best ever because it's just me, and obviously I'm working with some crude tools here, but let's say that this is a dot matrix picture. So why am I doing these little dots? Because I'm trying to make it that little dots form the image. Okay, is it possible to see this thing? What do you think that is? I'm trying to draw a scene. My art skill is not amazing, but is it at all visible? What do you think that could be? I could have made it bigger, sorry, but just see if it works. Tell me what you think that is. Got nothing for me? Someone can tell me, please. What do you think that is on the board? It's a picture of what? Ocean, sun, and birds. Okay, good. Thanks, Cameron. I was starting to worry. I'm like, no one can tell what it is. I have to draw it again. Okay. Can we all see it, hopefully? These are waves. I mean, I guess you could have thought they were mountain peaks. But anyway, it's waves. This is the sun shining down. These are some birds flying around, majestic birds flying as they do over the ocean. Okay, so it's a little scene of the beach or ocean. Now, imagine this, okay? If we have two dot matrix images, two dot matrix pictures, and they are dot for dot identical, then what is the second image going to look like in comparison with the first? If I now craft a second duplicate of this, which has the exact same mapping of dots. Wherever there's a dot here on the second grid, there's an exact copy of the placement of it, and in the exact same coloration. So if I have a dot-for-dot duplicate of the first image, then what does the second image look like? I hope this is not too hard. Don't stump you, but just if you can answer that. We reproduce the first image by a dot-for-dot duplicate. What would the second image appear as in that case? Same thing. Okay, good. Cameron, you're on it. But everybody else, you guys answer it too. It's the same thing. Wouldn't that be obvious? Because if it's a dot-for-dot duplicate, it's simply a replica. It's a copy of the first thing. Okay, hold that thought. We'll come back to this on Monday. I just wanted to get that clear. So if you have a dot matrix image and you have another one that's a dot duplicate of the first, it'll have the same exact features. Let me tell you sort of where this is all going so you have a sense of what to anticipate for when I can commence on Monday. The universe is kind of like a dot matrix. It's a bunch of atoms built together to form objects. Okay, so if there was another universe, which was atomically the same way of being arranged as this one, then it would contain all the same facts. It would contain all the same events and even the same psychological facts. So what that means then is that everything going on with you psychologically, mentally, or anything else is just based on the pattern of physical atoms that constitute you. Because if there was another closed physical system, another universe, which had the same atomic facts, then it would have a duplicate of you in it. And that duplicate would be doing and thinking the same things as you. This is supposed to give a sense that we're all just physical objects, because in theory, the same situation could be exactly replicated if the physical constituents were assembled in the same order. Okay, so that's supposed to make us believe or understand anyway that there's nothing that's not physical. Everything's physical because everything's made out of atoms, and there's nothing other than their composition of atoms. The same atomic structure would lead to the same large-scale objects and events. But anyways, that's about all I have time for us today. So thanks again, everyone, for all of your hard work and attention. Have a good weekend. I'll be in touch with you, and then we'll resume on Monday. We'll do a little bit more on the same subject. We'll finish Daniel Stoljak. Okay, have a great weekend. Take care, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.